Welcome to the 1% Better Recruitment Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Kiriakou, and this is the podcast where we aim to help recruiters, founders, managers, business owners get 1% better after every single episode. Every episode is unfiltered, unedited, uncensored, where we just have a free-flowing back and forth conversation with the aim to add tactics, tools, techniques, anecdotes, war stories, all in the hopes for you guys to get 1% better after every episode. It would mean the world to me if you could like, comment, subscribe, follow the podcast on all the channels that you view this on. We have a newsletter as well on LinkedIn if you could go and follow and subscribe onto that as well so you don't miss any episode. And if you find this or any of the other episodes enjoyable, please share them with your friends, your colleagues, and anyone that you think could benefit from it. Enough from me, let's get into today's episode. Hello everybody and welcome to the 1% Better Recruitment Podcast with your host, Charles Kiriakou. Today I'm joined by Joe West from Insite. Joe, thank you very much for joining me, mate. How are you?
Pleasure. Yeah, very well. Thank you, Charles. Happy to be here.
Good stuff, good stuff. So Joe and I met in person just before the Recruitment Agency Expo, which as we're recording is a week ago. And we've got a mutual contact, don't we, Joe? That guy that I've worked with in Aaron. I think you worked with him at Michael Page, right? Or I don't know if you managed him or something like that.
Yeah, his first role into recruitment, we hired him in and gave him a bit of a one-on-one on recruitment in Michael Page. And then so great to see him pop up a few years later, still in recruitment, doing really well, and watching him on your podcast, actually coming out with some bits that probably made me go, oh God, I didn't teach him that. He's learned that throughout the years and obviously got a lot better since as well. So nice to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of what viewers and listeners can expect from this episode, we're going to dive into the first thing, obviously, when we go into Joe's background and where he works now, what he's done before. But he'll tell you this, that Joe worked at Michael Page for a very long time. Michael Page is one of the biggest well-known recruitment agencies in the UK, now working for a slightly more boutique recruitment agency. So going to be interesting to go through the differences, the nuances from those types of businesses. Also, when we met, Joe mentioned something about a top-down coaching mentality, and we had a little bit of a conversation about it, but I wanted to wait until we can really dive into it on the podcast. We're going to go through that and a topic that I always love talking about, which is the traits that make a successful recruiter. And do you know what? Before I even say how long you've been in the industry and what you do, Joe, why don't you just give everyone a bit of an intro to you, your background, and how long you've been in recruitment, etc.
Oh, yeah. So, I joined recruitment in 2010. Coming out a bit of a difficult market at that point, and had a bit of a baptism of fire. I'd done tech recruitment for probably 9 months and very quickly saw that, you're only as good as your first month. I think I broke my leg and had a bit of complications from that. And very quickly it was, holding, you've been out for a month, you haven't billed, you're out the door. And that sort of old school mentality through to short stint in education recruitment, and then joined Michael Page, where I was for nearly 12 years up till the end of 2023, actually. So I built teams throughout that time, joined as a junior consultant, went through management, through to director, and managed 3 different offices with multiple divisions within the Page group, with Michael Page, Page personnel, a bit of that side, dealing with different levels of recruitment and different focuses on their recruitment. I think they're well known for the finance accountancy side, but we also had business support, HR, logistics, a lot of different elements in there as well. And then end of 2023, I came and joined Insite Group, that were launching new brands at the time, going on a bit of a hiring and growth mission. And that's been, again, another baptism of fire from a different viewpoint, I guess, having been here for 18 months now as well. So big changes, but I think for me, I got to a point where I got very good at recruitment, probably 5 or 6 years in, and was, top of the charts and, top billing and these sort of things you'd expect someone with that amount of experience. And it very quickly turned the focus into managing, training others and developing, which was a whole different ball game, which I'm sure we'll come on to a lot today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never worked in a big corporate within my recruitment career. The only corporate job I would say I ever had was working at Next when I was like 19 years old. And I think I realized in that first job that I had that I probably wasn't cut out for the corporate world. When you're told that you've got to say like company specific things to customers and dress a certain way. I always found that quite difficult. And whenever I've interviewed for businesses that were, massive, like over 200 people, I don't know whether it's just because I'm a bit weird or, I don't know what it is. I just always felt like I didn't fit in. I quite like the recruitment startup kind of vibe, because it's kind of, I like that healthy mix between the old school sort of cowboy type of stuff, but with the modern value led, good moral principles, if that makes sense. I know that's a bit of a weird contrast between the both, but yeah, I don't know. But from your perspective, you've worked within both. What would you say is, from your experience, like the key difference? Because I think people listening to this that maybe are looking to transition, I know that some people will think, oh, it might be easier working for a bigger business or easier working for a small business. As someone that's done kind of both, what would you say the key difference is from your experience?
Well, I agree with you. Funny enough, I probably didn't fit initially. My CV was rejected when I first applied to Michael Page, and I had to call and sell myself in because a rec direct told me, "Oh no, you already got your application. You're a no." And I called up, sold myself in, and got myself an interview. But I quickly saw that it was that more corporate environment,
Mm.
and they were transitioning. It was the kind of the old boys club that had been historically, and they were very quickly modernizing as I joined. And I wasn't that corporate model that fitted that easily. I think I
Mm.
became that over time a lot more, and I became more corporate as you're around a lot of the jargon that we had and the sort of
Yeah.
culture. But I was always the one that I guess was known as the arguer. Whenever we
Okay.
were directors' meetings, managers' meetings, I was always the one that was challenging our ways of working. And so
Mm.
much so, a lot of the other managers, directors, it was a bit of a running joke. They thought, oh, Joe will argue against that. No matter what you say, Joe will argue back. And I didn't mind that, to be honest, because most of it was true. Because I think we were doing things a lot in a big corporate for the masses, and because we wanted to put processes and structure in place so most people could do well, not so people could get to that 1%. We weren't really trying to develop absolute top billers. We were trying to train people so they were into the system that they could come in and do well, but not go off and be £1 million biller. And that's why my
Right.
place is very few £1 million billers, but there's a lot of people who are doing very well recruitment
Hmm.
wise.
Yeah.
And that came down to a lot of the kind of structure behind it. So, as a training ground for a lot of people that I trained over the years, Michael Page was the place for them and still is.
Mm.
There's people
Yeah.
that since I've transitioned have reached out from Michael Page going, what's it like? Obviously testing the
Mm.
water a little bit. And depending upon the person, a lot of times I said, no, stay put. You're well suited to the big
Yeah.
corporate. That suits you well. And the main thing I think I've seen, and you challenged me on this before, Charles, because I was like, for me, I was quite experienced making that
Hmm.
move. It didn't seem that different. Whilst I've been training people and brought people across with me into
Mm.
the boutique environment from larger corporates, I've seen some of them struggle, some of them do well. The ones that have struggled, I guess, have probably seen how they're a lot more exposed in a boutique. There's no there's not incoming jobs coming in left, right, and
Yeah.
centre that can mask their weaknesses or the issues that they have. They've got easy cross selling that goes on. The brand buys them that first
Yeah.
20, 30 seconds of a call. As we're in a boutique, it's on you. It's your personality, your way of working, and therefore the training for us, we've needed to adapt to
Mm.
be use your personality, be an individual, and that's how you're going to win business. As where before I'd be, okay, great. Well, look at the history. We built this much over this many years. That
Makes
person's
sense.
working with them up north. Reference that. There you
Mm.
go. Which for newer people is easier,
Hmm.
but I think it holds you back from ever really being able to go win business, sign PSLs in a sense that it's off of your own back and you've developed that relationship and move it forward. So
Yeah.
it's different for a lot of people getting into recruitment. If you're not your natural rebel and salesperson, I think
Mm.
a big corporate naturally suits. However, that boutique environment, arguably, you should, if you embrace things and there's good training there, be able to become a higher biller than you would in one of the corporates, in fact, as well. And
Mm.
I've seen that over the years as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to dive into kind of what the training looked like to at Michael Page, because I've mentioned this, like we're coming up to 40 episodes now, and I've mentioned this on so many of our episodes that you know, throughout my career, I never really had formal training. My first job, I was an apprentice. So we had to do like sales coursework, but it was like just the most basic. Like my nephew, who's 7, could understand that training. It was that kind of basic. Um, and I remember our operations director, who's kind of like the MD of the office, it was a very, very small business doing social care. We had like a broom closet, and she would sit on like a stool and just read from a book. It wasn't like an interactive training session. There was no PowerPoints. It was like we all had these like booklets, and she was like, right, Charles, read the next sentence. PSL stands for preferred suppliers list. Good. That was the kind of level of training we had. And I didn't like that market. Moved after 5 months. And then when I got into nursing recruitment, again, we had no training. I think we watched a couple of Mike Walmsley's like VHSs and DVDs in the boardroom at one point. But my like training, so to speak, was here's a list of numbers, make as many calls as you can, and just make sure you get better every day, which is terrifying for a lot of people. But because I felt like I was quite naturally good at speaking on the phone, I was never afraid of it. I would always hear my mum selling products on the phone and, you know, speaking to customers on the phone. So I was like, oh, I can speak to people on the phone. It's just a person. And eventually you do get better. But working in that business, as I'm sure you can imagine, you must have seen this before, the retention was absolutely abysmal because not everyone is competent on the phone or confident. And especially nowadays where we don't need to use the phone for anything. We literally don't need to use the phone for a damn thing. So when you hear like these recruitment business owners say, oh, the recruiters don't want to get on the phone. Yeah, because they don't need to, like in reality. And then you're telling them, oh, yeah, the two things in society we're told as children: don't interrupt me when you're busy, don't speak to strangers, and you're on top of that, you've got them that they don't need to be on the phone at all, and now we're telling them to be on the phone. That's where there's sort of a disconnect. I mean, is that something that you've kind of seen yourself over the years?
Yeah, definitely. It's changed hugely. Like you say, it used to be come and get on the phone and learn. And I had that crash course in IT recruitment for Europe before. So I'd seen that side of it. And to be honest, I didn't mind that. But
Mm.
before that, I'd done 100% commission door-to-door role, so rejection
Wow.
was not an issue for
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
happy speaking to people, but I'd already had that learning from that sales role beforehand. For anyone new, and especially for graduates coming in, very rarely would they be confident calling through a list. And I think that then only works with certain personality types, and
Mm.
those personality types maybe are going to lack the detail and understanding. Aaron was one of those, and I remember
Mm-hmm.
greatly. Aaron Collymore came in, and we gave him a list, and he would call through that list,
Mm.
and he was the hardest working person in the world, and he would say what he was told to say. What was obviously lacking was we'd taken away his identity, which obviously he's done really well with now. And I
Yeah.
see it on his podcast with you and everything. He is himself
Mm-hmm.
in a recruitment setting, which is why he's obviously doing so well. Before, we were effectively sterilizing him, trying to turn him into a big corporate recruiter. He's
Yeah.
not that person.
Mm.
Some people needed that. And with that structure that Michael Page can give people, if you're not a confident person, and also someone who doesn't believe they can be a top 10% biller
Mm-hmm.
and billing 500,000 plus, then that's a perfect setting for you.
Yeah.
We had some people that you would not consider salespeople, and they wouldn't consider themselves salespeople at all. They're all consultants, not
Mm.
sales recruiters, that did really well. And they suited that corporate environment. Them coming into an environment that's more boutique and it's more on your own personality, you've got to be willing to put yourself out there. People aren't willing to do that so much.
Yeah.
The rejection, the social anxiety that comes from it, and to be honest, it's something that made me read a lot of psychology books
Mm-hmm.
around when I started training and managing people. I was like, hold on, why are people not just doing this? I've given them a list of a
Mm.
thousand clients and gone, there's 100 grand's worth of business in that list alone. Call through it, and you see people do 10 calls, get a couple of rejections, or people don't answer.
Yeah.
They then slump, and I'm like, keep going. Look, there's gonna
Yeah.
be calls that you're gonna make, but then when they get to a buyer, a potential customer, they then are in such a negative mind frame that they then end up ballsing up that call really.
Yeah.
So for me, I guess, yeah, it's changed. We've had to adapt the way that we train now a lot of the time, but at Michael Page, it's the structure is great. The
Mm.
the platform as to great. This is how you have the conversation. This is where you
Yeah.
go with it. Excellent. And to get you billing and being profitable,
Mm.
there's a clear route there. What it
Mm.
also depended on a lot, what we saw with rookies coming into the business, was the person managing them. So they got this
Mm.
structured training that had been developed over 20, 30 years, and from, £1 billion business that should have been the best training in the world in that industry. And we saw it sometimes, and a lot of the time, probably 30, 40% of the time, fall flat when it came to performance of rookies. And a lot of the time, that would be then down to the manager. Are they reinforcing that training? Do they actually do that structure? Because what happened was, when people got to 2, 3 years in recruitment and got quite confident, they become a bit of a good
Yeah.
bidder. They use their
Mm.
personality, start winning more business. They don't follow that structure anymore. So that rookie comes in and goes, I've got to follow this structure, but he's doing it a different way. Why don't I do it like him? And
Mm.
there's so much contradiction that actually the best thing they did was when they trained the managers on the training they were giving the rookies. And we went back and went, hold on, managers, this is the structure we're giving. This is the things you need to buy into. But as you can imagine, getting some top billers and managers who had performed
It's tough.
well and telling them, actually, don't do things the way you do and have been successful,
Yeah.
do it this way for structure, caused people to switch off a lot of the time, as they do
Yeah.
in training. Everyone wants training and getting added value. When they get it, especially experienced recruiters, they go, oh, what time is it? Okay, it's going to take me away from doing this and
Yeah.
this, and
Yeah.
not wanting to spend that time investing in their own skills because they want that short-term fee on the board, and they're worried, okay, well, actually, I'm light on jobs, or I
Mm.
need candidates at the moment. So
Yeah.
do I need to be in that training? And that for me is always a bit of was a red flag that I used to get annoyed by, because I was like, hold on,
Yeah.
if I'm spending time training you, or, we're investing this much in supporting people, why am I more bought into you getting better than you are? And
Mm.
actually, a lot of the time, it's just that instant gratification part of people's psychology of, I want to see the immediate result. I want to do things now. I'm not so fussed in getting 10% better as well,
Yeah.
which holds a lot of people back. And I think Michael Page initially, with that structure, over the years, and especially when I was confident enough and
Mm.
managing and directing, I was more than happy going, hold on, we need to change this training. This is too
Mm.
slow, or this isn't useful anymore. This was from 5 years ago. You call up now and
Mm.
give you initially trained to give a 40-second introduction, like elevator pitch on
Yeah.
yourself. And you saw it just trigger sales resistance when someone's not confident and they're
Yeah.
new and they're a little bit nervy and they're doing a 47 introduction. They're going to mess it up naturally,
Yeah.
even if they've got it written down and role played a million times. And the sales resistance come back from clients would mean no matter how good their questions were after, the client would just be switched off. So a
Mm.
lot of it was training people to do the BD side, but we didn't even have it that hard from a business development viewpoint
I
because
can
we were
imagine.
a top brand, yeah,
Yeah.
but we were still weak on it, I guess, where
Yeah.
we should have been absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Mm. Well, I think what you said about having like this machine and like consultants kind of go through the cogs. That's my last business. That's kind of what they said to me, how they wanted me to build their L&D department. And I think you and I had a conversation when we first met, and I said, from my perspective, and like I said at the start of this episode, I like that startup environment. I like that, allowing people to flourish and be unique and be themselves, as opposed to having just robots going out and winning business. And we didn't really have a brand properly at that point. It was only a couple of years, so largely it was a lot of cold business, and it was off of the back of the directors' names because they've been doing those markets for a long period of time. But something else that you said earlier about there's two things that I wanted to pick up on: senior consultants, managers that in their performance reviews, they'll say, yeah, I could do with more training. The minute you do a training session, they're like, oh, I can't be asked. And also delivering great training or coaching and then wondering why things don't work out with that consultant. And you said about the managers not reinforcing it. Whenever I go into a business and I meet like the MD, the founder, the managers or whatever, I always just put my hands up immediately and say, I'm not a miracle worker. If any trainer, any coach, like any of these Instagram gurus say that they can make them millionaires and stuff, it's bollocks. Right. What I can do is I can implement these, like the theory aspects, and coach them and help with their beliefs, the behaviors and habits. But I'm only a third of the impact on that person. And I always get like an eyebrow raise from someone. They go, oh, because realistically, like I'm technically selling my service. The old me, when I'm in recruitment, was like, yeah, I'll fill your role in 5 seconds. Like, but now it's like, no, I'm just going to be very transparent with you. I will do the third part of it very, very well, and I break that down. The other third has to come from top down, which is a topic we'll talk about in a moment. So you as a manager or as a director, as a founder, if I teach this person some tactics on how to deal with objections and how to get higher fees or how to pitch retainers, and then you're not doing that yourself, you're being very like resistant with clients on the phone, or you're asking closed questions all the time, they're just going to mirror your behavior, monkey see monkey do type thing, right? So that's the thing that I say to them. And and then I say that the last part is the recruiter, because I've worked with recruiters where I'll sit down in a coaching session, and unfortunately, two or three times out of 10, a recruiter wants to sit down just to vent to me or to moan and say, "Oh, my boss is being horrible. Oh, the market's really hard. Oh, the tech we have is crap. Blah blah blah." And if that recruiter does not want to actually improve, it doesn't matter how good the training is. It doesn't matter how good the manager is. That person, if they don't want to do it, they just won't do it. So that's why whenever I go into business, I can identify, and I'll just be very honest. And that's the aspect of my job I hate, is when the manager says like, who's going to make it, who isn't, and I'm like, oh, I really like this person, but they just don't want it, and like it's just not worth the investment putting it into that person. Maybe they're better off for a big corporate, maybe they're better off working for a small, do you know what I mean? So that type of thing. But the other thing I was going to say as well that makes me laugh is, it's so ironic as a coach, as a trainer now. When I was a recruiter, I fucking hated training. I hated role plays because I was one of the top performers. I was always selling retainers. And I've mentioned this many times on the podcast, but my old operations director, Bex, she put together an objection handling workshop. And I was great at dealing with objections. I was naturally quite empathetic. My questioning techniques were phenomenal. And as soon as she did it, I just looked at her and was like, mate, I've got so much on. I don't need to be doing this with a bunch of trainees. And she helped me reframe it and said, when you go to your Thai boxing and stuff like that, you spar with people, right? You practice fighting. So you're not actually fighting your colleagues, you're practicing. This is the exact same thing. It's just for your job, like sales and stuff. And I was like, okay. And she said, and also, even if you don't learn something new, you'll refine the skills you have and look around. You're a natural leader. Your input and your anecdotes, your stories will help other people learn. And that's one thing that I take into what I do now, because I will purposely get managers in. They'll be like, oh, Charles, Joe, I already know how to deal with objections. Great. Tell the rookies how you do it, and then link it back to the technique, which is an easy technique. Every single time, pretty much, the seniors will go, fair enough. And when they tell their anecdotes of, oh, I had this client back in 2019, their objection was this is how I dealt with it. You can just look around the room and all the rookies are vigorously writing down notes and going, wow. And that's how they're like soaking in the information, right?
We saw it a lot. We used to have people split off because obviously my page so big, people split off into their tenure. And it was,
Mm,
okay, you hit 18 months, you then get to go on this training. And so
mm,
it's filled with a room of people 18 months to 2 years in. And the training is therefore all top down. It's all the
yeah,
managers, directors who are leading that training, completely dictating it. Not many people especially early on in their career, are going to have the balls to turn up and go, hold on, I've seen it done this way. Why can't I do it like this? They're going to sit there, nod,
yeah,
go back to their office, and then it's never going to get ingrained. That's the thing,
mm,
it's so we never really focused enough on creating a habit. It was always great. Here's some excellent bits you can go and do that. But unless you
mm,
see an immediate result from it, people shy away and go back to the general habit that they see as well. And
mm,
it's always very dependent upon the person leading the training. You've
mm,
seen that obviously when you're running a lot of it as well from an L&D perspective, the connection you have with that person makes it that much more effective or useless. If they don't like you or respect you, they're just going to switch off.
yeah,
Even though your content could be perfect for them, there's always, and this is because we're dealing in a sales recruitment environment,
mm,
it's the ego. We hire people
yeah.
with egos, and yet we expect them not to have it when it comes to training and learning. We're like, no, just listen to me, do it this way. And I'm like, no, it's a good thing if they don't listen, because it means there's a reason in their mind they're doing it that way. And it's
Yeah.
normally, oh, well, I've had that backfire before, or I've seen this work before.
Mm,
Great. Okay. Well, why do you think that's worked? Why is it landed?
yeah.
And as recruiters, we are awful generally at breaking things down. I used to go around Michael
Yeah.
Page and always ask the top rookies what they were doing. And I'd
Mm,
call them and go, what are you doing? You've only been here a year. You're doing really well.
mhm,
Why? what are you saying? And they'd be like, hold on, Joe, you bill 3 times more than me. You've been here
Mm.
5 years. You're billing loads more. Why are you asking me this? And they were a bit taken back. And part of it was so I could implement that to the team. And always go back to the team. And I'd moan at them all the time. Look, we're big corporate business. The leaderboards are all published. Go and speak to the top biller. Pick up the phone, ask them what they're doing. No one would. And it was just such a loss. Yeah. And so I did it. So I went and did it. And then I'd go back to them and go, great. And I remember this guy, James Bateman, he's still with Michael Page, probably doing very well as well. And he came in and he broke all the records for the top rookie. Absolutely knocked it out of the park. And everyone around him, it's not that his team was performing, amazingly or anything. He came in and absolutely beat everyone. And he very quickly got to the level of billing that I was at, and then surpassed that. But when I called him and asked what he was doing, it was, oh no, I've got lucky, and oh, I've called these clients at the right time. And I'm like, no, hold on. That client no one's ever worked with, a big corporate brand, and you placed 20 people there. So what did you say when you're on the phone? Oh, well, actually, and then once I drilled into what he was doing, he had some amazing stuff. I mean, his note-taking administration was awful. He showed me his Post-it notes, and it was all over the place. But he was just great at when he was speaking to someone, he also would challenge them. And that's what a lot of people just aren't willing to do. It's almost that client on a pedestal side. And especially with new people, I've seen it where people's guts, which we hire them for, we're like, you've got good instincts. Okay, you can be good at this. You've got the work ethic. You've got those parts. We'll hire you, train you. And then getting them to listen to that gut. And he was obviously doing that a lot. He was on the phone going, hold on, what are you looking for? Why are you struggling then? Why did you even take my call? What are you doing? And other new people are going, oh, okay, you want that? Great, I'll go find you that. Lo and behold, they can't support. They then end up not filling the role, and it's a waste of everyone's time. And I think the people who have got the balls, I've got to find another way of saying balls, the confidence, to turn around and go, hold on, actually, Mr. Client, why are you doing that? Is such a big thing for me. I want people with that curiosity side that are going to ask questions, because they learn so much faster. Even without extensive training, they'll learn better by asking why and asking those open questions that everyone's told in recruitment. Ask nice open questions. Actually, I'd ask, okay, well, you want, they have to have a degree. Why? What does a degree tell you on them? Now, their view could be, I hired people without a degree that were dumb, and therefore, all of them are dumb. And they'll give you the reason why their thought process has been formed. And a lot of the time, we just don't listen to that. Likewise, when we're training people, it's, okay, why do you think doing that is the best way? And they'll give you a reason that actually might make you go, okay, I get that logic, but what about if we think it this way? Otherwise, we're applying our logic to theirs, which the chance of it connecting is very slim.
That's 100%. There's something that I was going to backtrack on when you were talking about like the seniors and the managers coming into training. One thing I've noticed with the more senior people, unless they have specifically asked for training, so if you've got a principal consultant that's going to move into leadership, 9 times out of 10, that person's going to sit down wide-eyed with a notepad ready to learn. If you've got a top biller doing £250,000 a year and you're going to go, right, log onto this platform, you're going to learn how to sell retainers. This is me, by the way. And then I'm sat there going, right, I just sold a 250 grand retainer last year. Now you're going to tell me to do an online training platform to sell retainers. Are you joking me? Like, I'm just not going to do this. So I just immediately sort of switch off. But what I've realized since working with a variety of different people, like Aaron's obviously a director now, so I was coaching with him. He's been in some of my training sessions as well. And obviously I work with a lot of rookies. The senior guys, I think they respond a lot better to the one-to-one coaching. When you sit down with them and say, like, tell me where you're currently at. And if they sit there and go, yeah, I'm on 190K for the year, I'm doing quite good. I'm on track to hit 250, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. What challenges are you having? Where do you want to improve? If they sit there and say, I'm happy at this level, don't really feel fine, cool, crack on. That's fine. You do your thing. I'm not going to sit here and waste my time. I don't think your boss needs to waste their time. If you're happy and you're on target and all the rest of it, happy days. But if that person says to me and goes, well, do you know what, Charles? Actually, a lot of my work is contingent. I want to go retained. Okay, what's your experience with that? I've not really done it. Okay, there we go. And then that's the session. And then if you say, tell you what, mate, Joe, should we do a retainer training and you can be in that and I get some of the rookies? Yeah, 100%. then that senior person will be actually more receptive to that training. But when you have, and I say this to clients all the time about, oh, can you come and do the odd training session here? And I'm like, I can, but like I'm just honest with people. I'm like, I can come in and do the odd training session. I like to think that I'm quite engaging and fun, and I can build rapport with people very quickly. But there's sometimes people in there that are super experienced. They don't know me yet. And if they don't follow me on LinkedIn, there's no trust already built. So the first 10, 15 minutes is like almost a bit of an uphill battle of like trying to get that. That's like the thing for me is trying to get that person on board with me. And I guess one of the ways I do that, and I'm sure you might do this as well, is just my training style is very like conversational, very like the presentation is just questions. And say, for example, if you were in the session and the thing was about retainers, what's been your experience with retainers? Well, again, it's kind of like that coaching thing in front of the cohort. And then if they have had some successes, I try and unpack that. And like you said, where recruiters kind of, let's face it, they do suck at reverse engineering things, you get them to almost reverse engineer it on the spot. And then they look around the room and everyone's like, oh, wow, I didn't really think about it like that. Then you add your cherry on the icing on top and go, brilliant. And if you did this, that's how you can just nail the meeting or whatever it might be. And that's kind of how I've sort of tried to get people on board. But there was another thing that I was going to say to you. You're like this. So when I joined a company called Projectus, we didn't really have formal training at all. We had an L&D consultant come in once a fortnight, and she would sit by your side and help you with your calls and all the rest of it. But I'll never forget this, Joe. We had a massive poster, bigger than my whiteboard behind me, and it just had the start of every open question. And my boss would just literally point at that and just say, every single question needs to start with that. And if I ever said, Joe, are you looking for 40K? I'd get smacked on the back with like a little bit of cardboard, but it was like that getting into the habit. So now that habit's been like, it's seriously ingrained over the last 10 years. When I've gone into this client I've been working with on a 90-day sprint for Q1, they've got like a little like whiteboard with the paper on it and stuff. And I've just written those questions, and we do the cold calling, the call coaching sessions in there. And I was working with this girl, and she's got great work ethic, really good personality, but like a lot of trainee recruiters or junior recruiters, they freeze when they get to a certain point. The client just says one word answer, and they go, well, look, you're very busy, so I'm just going to, then they freak out towards the end of the call. And then we finished the call, and I was like, what questions could you have asked? And she was like, I don't really know, because this is kind of a new market. And I didn't know the market at all. And I just pointed at the board and I said, first thing was like, so what are your plans for hiring? Next one, how are you looking to hire? Third one, why aren't you currently hiring, or why are you hiring for that position? Whereabouts would you hire this person? And she's just looking at me going, oh, you just know this off the top of your head. Well, firstly, I've been doing it nearly 11 years, well, over 11 years. So that's probably why. But secondly, if you just trust these open questions and anything that person says, just respond with okay, tell me a little bit about that. Why is that, out of curiosity? How would you do that? And have the curiosity tone and that inquisitive nature about you. There's no resistance. And I use the analogy of like a bit of sandpaper in between you and the client. And every single open question with the tone, slowly you move that sandpaper away and there's no friction anymore. Because the more friction you have with the person on the phone, if you ask a client, well, Joe, why haven't you worked retained with a recruiter? And there's no rapport and you've got that friction. What do you mean, why? And then there's just going to be lots more friction. So I thought that was quite a fun anecdote that I could tell you, and maybe you might be able to unpack that. Quick one from me. If you're enjoying today's video, two things. First and foremost, like, follow, subscribe, leave a review, all that kind of good stuff. The other thing is, as you probably already know, the way I fund this podcast is through my coaching business. So if you're listening or watching this podcast, you're probably someone that is all about personal development, right? So if you're all about personal development and you want to develop your mindset, you want to develop some real world strategies, or perhaps it's simply just the recruitment aspect. I've been in this industry over 10 years. I've been in the L&D space for over 3 years now, and I'm so passionate about helping people. I feel like this is the purpose that I've been put on this earth for, is to help people in this recruitment industry. So if you're interested in coaching, in training as a recruiter, or perhaps you're a business owner and you want to upskill everyone in the business, take your company to the next level, then why don't you just reach out to me? You can reach out on LinkedIn. All my contact information is on my banner and in my profile, and also on my website. But that's enough from me. Let's get back in today's episode.
Yeah, definitely. You see it a lot, and it's that kind of defense element that comes up, like the sales assurance from clients. When people are being trained, they're naturally sat in the room thinking, doubting themselves, or thinking, oh, I'm in this training because I'm not doing well enough at the moment. And they start, that imposter syndrome element, kind of anxiety comes in. But I think too often it's part of those trainers have got to a point where they're good recruiters and they've been promoted to training L&D roles, or we had a lot of people at Page and some great trainers. Bev Nichols was one of the person that made me really pay more attention to training, because everything on her initial intro was she was a top biller, top performing team. She had the record for the most sales of FT advertisements at the time. And she'd come into training as a top performer, was able to go off that experience. But also, you could tell she had a passion for it. She introduced me to like the growth mindset with Carol Dweck and these sort of things. And it's something that I had never looked at before. Most trainers, though, I'd seen are people who've been a recruiter, build quite well, and gone, oh, actually, I need to take a more laid back role, whether it be parental side or just stress level. And they'd never actually trained people to do well. So they'd only ever learned to build. So they knew one way of working their way. So when it came to training someone different personality type or different focus, it just didn't connect. And like you say, when you don't connect, it's then what they're going to think the next part of training that could be really good, just not going to listen to, and it's completely wasted. And so many of those people, I think, are those gurus online and these sort of things. And I think the most eye-opening thing is when you're training a new manager who train, and you see the frustrations that, I reflect on it now. When I was a relatively new manager, when I was training Aaron, I made mistakes. Sorry, Aaron. And a few of the team I had at the time were great, and we did really well with, but I think I made so many mistakes, because when someone's new to training, what do? They tell them once and expect them to learn it. There's no reinforcement. There's no creating that habit at all. And I used to do that. I used to be dictatorial of, okay, great, this is the way to do it. Do it this way. Call through these 1,000 people. It will work. And people very quickly go, oh no, Joe, you're just a magician. You're just great at that. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I need to break it down and tell you this is how I do it, because obviously I haven't made that clear enough. New managers get so frustrated with the people they're training. It is funny. But they always blame the person they're training. Oh, they're just not bright enough, or, they haven't got the mind for it. They're not hardworking enough. And they forget that they were that person. And therefore, hold on, why put yourself in their shoes? You've told them something once, they're now not doing it, or they've had a back out. And the first time you have a back out should be a bit of a eureka moment for people in recruitment. It's not normally. It's normally like fifth back out that you have, that you start to realize a bit of a chain, but it takes your manager to break it down and walk through it to make you realize it, to talk about a counter offer at the start and drill into why you're looking to leave, what you want out of it. And exactly like you said, you're kind of unpacking the logic in their head, because too often we just guess really and go, the amount of times where at the moment when I'm going through people's pipelines and forecasts and I'm like, okay, why do you think that's going to happen? Oh, well, the candidate's kind of said this, so I think this will happen because of that. And I'm like, okay, well, have you asked the candidate if they're actually their number one choice, or if they prefer something else? Have you asked the client if they've got any concerns on the candidate? And people are scared to ask those questions that could lead to a no or a negative. And they're too scared to put themselves out there. Like you said, that kind of social norm of, as soon as conversation get awkward, you cut the call. Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Klein, bye. But it's difficult because we try to hire social recruiters, people with social norms and, and yet we expect them to push past that awkwardness. When people have social skills, they know to jump away from a conversation. Yet we 100%. Say, oh no, just carry on going. Here you go. And we don't give them the route to do that. But like you say, you give them, those stock questions they can ask that then should become habit. They'll see them work, carry on asking them, and then they're built into their sort of structure with their own take on it as well. Otherwise, they're asking questions and just parroting, aren't they?
Yeah, no, 100%. And what you were saying there about like the coaching and, sitting down and breaking down like the pipeline, the forecast. I remember my old director, Tim, always said to me, you're a great coach. You're going to be a great coach. You're a brilliant leader, but you suck at managing. And that was like a bit of a knife in the chest, Joe, because I was like as a team lead, as a manager, as a sales manager, I was like, it's not very nice. But he was so true, because coaching, sitting down and like setting their goals. And, I remember my first hire, Oscar, he was about to basically be fired because he wasn't very good at 360. I took him under my wing, and because I was predominantly retained, and I saw he was a blue personality. He was a perfectionist and he was exceptional. I've never met anyone like it where they can close a candidate. He had the record for the most amount of candidates placed on a deficit on salary. So he'd get candidates 10K less, but somehow place them because he qualified them so impressively well. And he did 100K from nothing in the first year. I took him to Ibiza with me, and that was all on split. And the next year I was like, right, you've taken some jobs on, but there's a weakness in your BD game, and you can't just be filling my jobs forever. You're not my resourcer. You're a recruiter. So the next year, I can't remember the specific number he did, but he started to do the critical care market, where he was recruiting salespeople selling respiratory devices, critical care beds, all that type of stuff, and he did quite well. But my second hire, Drew, bright red personality, ex-hockey coach, Team GB hockey, done his ACL, so couldn't do that anymore. The classic story that you hear. Went to a good university, quite well spoken, a few years older than me. A bit of a clash. And, at the time I was, as a manager, I was ever so slightly red, I'd say like 25, but mainly a sunshine yellow, very, very chatty. How was your weekend? All that type of jazz. He didn't really like that. And also, he thought, because he's a little bit older than me, well, this guy's like 24 years old, 25 years old. What's this guy going to teach me? So you had to kind of almost shift the way that you'd work with that individual. Because if you sit there and say, look, this is what you need to do, they're just going to do the opposite. It's like a child. They're just going to say, no, I'm going to do it my way. So we just let him.
Person. Yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of let him see how he was going to do things. And obviously there were massive gaps in his game, but we could see he had potential to be a top biller. So what I just did with that guy is I sat down in the coaching sessions and was like, right, what's your why? Why do you come to work? What do you want to achieve? How much money do you want to earn? Why do you want to earn the money, etc.? And it turned out that he wanted to propose to his then girlfriend, wanted to have kids, wanted to buy a house, all the rest of it. And I just reversed engineered the goal and said, if you do X amount of deals, X amount of this value, and then broke it down to the amount of calls he had to make. And I just finished the coaching session off, well, what do you need from me? And he was like, I suppose just let me know what I'm doing well and what I'm doing bad on the calls. And I just said, well, I'll tell you what, right now, this is what you're doing really well. This is what you could improve, but keep doing that. Gave him the shit sandwich. And then before we left, I said, just do me one favor. Whenever you hear me on the phone, go away. Whenever you hear me on the phone, I just want you to listen to me when I'm pitching retainers. And I want you to jump on some calls with me to see the types of questions I'm asking, the closing techniques I'm utilizing, et cetera, et cetera. And he jumps on the calls. And obviously, initially, he's just like, yeah, I can do it better, like that. Because he had a bit of an ego. And I quite like that about him. And the next thing, he just was like, well, if Charles can do it, I can do it. And then he started getting retainer after retainer after retainer. Then he just built the entire DAC market. And this was so funny. He was like, I've done more billings than you this month. Good. You're in my team. Like, I don't have a number personally. That's actually, you saying that is actually making me feel really proud. And the fact that I've done a good job. And he was like, well, I bet you I can outbill you this year. I fucking hope you can. And then he sold more retainers than me that quarter. I won this thing, like they got recognized at the end of the quarter and was like, yeah, Drew, he's won the most amount of retainers this month. He's like, there you go, Charles. And I went, who else in the business is selling retainers right now besides you and me? And he looked around and went, yeah, it's just you and I. And I went, there we go. And he was like, oh, fuck. Yeah. Oh, shit. And it was just that, like, because you talked about the sort of top-down coaching mentality. That's when I realized that type of individual, he just needed to kind of just have one eye on kind of what you do and then just be constantly reminded of what his why is, why he's here, what he's going to do, etc. The minute I sat there and was like, right, this is how you're going to do your day plan, he would just shut the fuck. I'm not interested. Don't tell me how to work. I want to do it my own way. But just ever so slightly just coaching him, like what you said, why would you do it that way? Perhaps maybe you could ask that question. What do you think? And get the psychology of him going, yeah, I think I'm going to do it this way. It's like, yeah, you think you're going to do it that way. You do it that way. And then he did it and he was super, super successful. So yeah, I wanted to get your opinion as well, actually, because that was actually a topic we're going to talk about the top-down coaching mentality. Because I'm a coach, so obviously I'm going to firmly believe in it. But I think a lot of businesses, they don't do a lot of it. And I see that one of my biggest pet peeves is when I see a director or a CEO, there's a healthy balance between when to tell someone and when to ask someone. And I'm learning every single day. There's sometimes I'm sat down with a rookie and I'm like, what do you think you should do? And I'm like, fuck, I shouldn't have asked that, because they just don't know. They have no experience. And then I'm like, right, okay. So there's elements of the coaching session. You go, right, this is what you need to do. Then you ask them the feedback and what their thoughts are. But what from your perspective, how would you describe a top-down coaching mentality in a business?
So a lot of it is led by the owners. Like you say, owners will ask you to come into the business, and you've got it harder as well in the fact that you're walking into businesses. I've got the benefit of I'm in the business. They can see me. They can see the
Yeah.
credibility and these sort of things. They can see billings, everything else, or history behind it. As we're walking in, I think it's always so driven by owners and the owners' way of working of, okay, well, we've done it through hard work, so we need everyone to be hardworking, or we've done it through ingenuity, and actually we're great at connecting the dots, so let's get them to connect the dots. But each time you do that, you're opening up to maybe 20% of your workforce, but the other 18%, 80% are going to disengage and blame other elements. So it is very much people aren't used to being flexible from that training viewpoint. It's very much, okay, well, this is the way that we know works. And I've seen it hugely over the last few years, I guess, or when the market's tough, that's when people revert back to, okay, we've got to just go back to doing this.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, that worked a few years ago. And so they've gone, okay, well, that worked a few years ago, and we're now doing badly, so let's go back to that. And they always used to frame it at my question, let's go back to basics and do this sort of part.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for what I've seen over the years is those basics have changed. From the number of BD calls, meetings, there's different priorities on recruitment now than there used to be. Yet a lot of the KPIs for a long time at Page were always the same and didn't change. It was only when we started doing really well that I think the managers, directors all turned around and went, hold on, these aren't right anymore. And then they changed. But lo and behold, they reverted back as soon as it got tougher.
What type of KPIs did they have? What were those KPIs there?
Oh, gosh. So it was, jobs on, call time. So it was always tiger time at Page. We still call it that here now out of just habit. 10 hours a week on the phone was always the aim. And then it was always dropping, as it has done in recruitment. More's gone online and LinkedIn and these sort of things, but it was always 10 hours. CVs sent, make sure you send 10 CVs a week. You need to get 5 interviews, 3 jobs on a week. No necessary idea on the quality of jobs. So people would load 3 leads on the system and be, I've got my 3 jobs for the week. And I'm like, okay, great. How many of them exclusive? How many of them are retained? And what are we doing? When are you going to fill those? When are you forecasting them? And that's when you quickly realize people are playing the KPI game. I've seen it where people have called their own phone and, they leave at 6 o'clock and they leave their phone onto their mobile. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm not going to fire you because you're not hitting your phone times. I'm not even having a go at you about it. And I saw that very early on when I was managing, and it was someone who was performing just as well as me. And he felt he needed to do that. And that kind of gave me a bit of a shock that, oh, gosh, okay, we're creating an environment and culture that makes people think they need to do things for the sake of it rather than added value. I'm all for if someone can do 2 hours a week on the phone and be incredibly effective and successful, I'm not going to push them to do 10 hours because they're probably the sort of person who is very good at connecting the dots and working commercially. Other people, where they don't do that part and they don't have that part to their brain, are going to need to do 100 BD calls and knock down the doors and play the numbers game. But that's probably about knowing your people well enough. And a lot of the time, the directors, as soon as your span of control gets too big, you don't know those people well enough to know what lands. And what you do, you split your people into tenure and train them based on their tenure rather than train them based on their personality type or their performance and these sort of things, because people don't like admitting it was always, oh, let's train them because they've been here that long or they're that job level, rather than, well, actually, that person's billing 100 grand. They shouldn't be in the same room as someone billing 400 grand from a training perspective. Yes, they need to go back to the basics. They need it on retainers, on exclusivity, on, PSLs and wider agreements and account managing. And so, but they'd be stuck in the same room. And therefore the training would turn more vanilla because the director would feel that they need to be given this message as a collective rather than let's coach someone to be a top biller. Because as I say, Michael Page, we didn't create top billers that are billing 500k plus. There was a handful. of people.
Mm.
And that was a bit eye-opening, especially coming to boutique, seeing what people have built before. And when, naturally I come in and people are asking, well, what have you built and what's been your best
Yeah.
year and these sort of things. And, I'm fine with telling because my numbers have always been quite good, but mainly because I've always wanted to get better and make sure I'm improving. It's funny that you say I've had lots of people over the years come and go, I beat you this month and these sort of things. I'm like,
Yeah.
great. Carry on beating me then, because I'm staying at this level. You're
Yeah.
going to go up and down because actually your pipeline next month isn't good enough. So let's make sure we don't just fill our jobs and have an amazing month. We can have an amazing year. But the difference with the top billers is always their client relationships. We see it over and over. To get that 200 to 500K, it's those relationships that come as well. But the top-down coaching, just for me, turns a little bit historic. It's always, the training here, I try and do it of what do we need now and what do people want, and give them options of, okay, well, I feel like we need training on this. What do you think's key? Therefore, they're more engaged when they come in and they do these things. But I think too often where there's a structured plan of we're doing this training, then this training, doesn't allow for that ingenuity and personalization that we know recruiters do really well. Any top performers, it's because they've got a personality normally and they're using it. They could be the most boring person alive. I mean, I've worked with some really boring recruiters who were great recruiters, but that's because what they do is they just find the boring clients and they partner with them. I mean, I say they're boring. They probably say I'm mad, but it's people finding the clients that fit them.
Yeah,
too
that's
often
what it's all
people
about.
are just trying to sell to everybody.
Yeah. Well, what you said earlier kind of sparked a memory about when the going gets tough, they kind of revert back to the old KPIs and they reduce the coaching and just say, right, get on the phones, everyone get on the desks, rah, rah, rah. And I remember when I was the L&D manager, I used to do a lot of off-desk coaching because a lot of the recruiters that we had hired if you did stuff on desk with them, they would not be listening to what you're saying because they're so self-conscious of everyone's eyes. And if you've got a culture, well, if you're not there with the culture, which is super personal development, well done, you made a fail, well done, you made a success, that type of culture, then naturally, if you've got a 19-year-old person that sat there on the phone with their L&D manager, their director, their manager, and the senior consultant, they're shitting themselves. So I'd always say to the directors, it's like doing puppy training. You don't train your puppy to heel and sit whilst there's chaos all around you in the city centre. You do it at home in the quiet with less distractions, and then you start building. No, Charles, that's not how you do it. When you're doing it, everyone else is going to learn from that. I know, but I work on individuals. You're not looking at the individual here. Just do it this way. You do it that way, it doesn't necessarily work all the time, right? So I did a lot of the one-to-one coaching with people, making sure it was super bespoke for those types of people. But what kind of springs back to mind is one day the business was kind of in a bit of a rut, and the director said, right, we're going to go back to basics, like what you were saying. We're going to do 100 BD calls, we're going to do the call times, and we're going to do all this type of stuff. We're going to set targets for 50 60 spec outs per week, blah blah blah. And I just remember where have you pulled these numbers from? Because I'm a very curious person, and for some people that's very frustrating. But if you're going to say to me, right, you're going to do this, I'm always going to say, okay, can you tell me why? And I don't know whether that's it's just the way I am. I just want to understand why. And I got told, no, this is just what we're doing. And I just went away with my L&D consultant so I could just crunch the numbers and look at the data. And I realized that 90% of our jobs have come from email marketing. And I said, so the going's getting tough, and you're now going to stop the thing that has pulled 90% of the entire business's jobs, and we're going to go and do something that has not even got 5% of our jobs. We're just going to do it this way. Okay, cool. Let's do it that way. We've done it that way. Guess how many jobs we pulled by the end of the month by doing the cold calling sprints? 0. We didn't get any. And I was just like, there's something seriously wrong here. In their industry, they didn't have companies that had office numbers. They were all remote. So you couldn't do the whole headhunting, which is what I used to do. I'd call up the office number, speak to the whole gatekeeper type of jazz, and then get through that. There wasn't any of that. So it was very much social selling, leaning on your personal brand, direct personalized LinkedIn messages, personalized spec outs, and calling up after, rather than just non-prepared power dialing, just getting through to as many people as possible. And that for me, there was kind of a bit of a wake-up call of look, that's fine. If a business kind of wants to just do the top down dictatorial type of mindset, that's fine. That's just not for me. I prefer working with businesses, and I'm so fortunate now I get to choose who I work with. That when I go into a business and say, look, this is how I work, this is how I like to like, or how I like businesses to work. Unfortunately, law of attraction, whatever you want to call it, you attract, like what you were saying, boring clients or exciting coaching oriented clients. I now work with clients that say, look, you figure it out, let us know. And if it's not working, it's not working, we'll do something else. And that for me is like what you said earlier about the growth mindset. If you're trying something and it's not working, great. You've learned something. Maybe it means you just need to upskill in that specific thing, or you've tried it, move on and try and do something else, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and too often I think it's hard because in recruitment, people just get so much in the zone and they get used to the day to day and they just get sucked into it that they never sit back and analyze their own performance or break down. Okay, I had a great month last month. The month before I had an awful. What was the difference in them? Why did I do that? Did I get lucky and these sort of things? And,
Mm,
we joke, one of the top performer last year here, jokes about when he sat in a certain seat and, oh, this is a money chair or this isn't, and these sort of things. And he knows he's being silly with it. But I think for him to say it, who's incredibly good and successful, is quite telling that the juniors will be thinking it, but not expressing it out loud
yeah.
as well. But yeah, it's the fun of managing and training and the difficulty that comes with it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I'm conscious of time. The last thing that I wanted to speak to you about, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, is the traits that make a successful recruiter. But I also want to ask you as well that oftentimes recruiters get promoted to manager because they're a high performer, which I kind of disagree with. I think you have to have specific traits that qualify you for leadership and for management. But if you were to say, and this is quite difficult to put a number on it, but like three traits, you've obviously hired and trained many people over the years. When you're looking at a rookie or an experienced person coming into your business, what would you say are like the three traits that you look for that you think if you've got these three things, you've kind of got the foundations to be successful in this job as a recruiter?
Yeah. So for me, it's the resilience. Um, I want to see how someone's responded to something negative
Mm-hmm.
before. And usually that's something quite personal. I've hired a
Yeah.
lot of graduates over the years and trained them and always prided myself on having the top rookie every year and these sort of
Mm.
things. But I think a lot of the time it doesn't matter their background, if they're well off, if they've been poor and struggled, it's more what's gone wrong and to them, how have they responded? Are they
Mm.
someone to curl up in a ball? Are they someone who's hit that adversity back? And it also tells you this kind of support network, who they've got cheering
Yeah.
them on in the
Mm-hmm.
background, or whether, unfortunately, they're going to really struggle from a mental health perspective. Because again, it's an
Mm.
area where recruitment's failed a lot of, potential top performers
Mm-hmm.
because it's not supported people through those challenges that
Yeah.
we probably created from a bit of pressure and,
Yeah. Yeah.
revenue generating performance as well. So that's probably the first one, the resilience. That ties in with the work ethic, which is
Mm-hmm.
always a bit of a given in recruitment. If you don't have
Of
the work
course.
ethic, but I've seen lazy recruiters do really well as well, where they've been very talented. However, that's a
Mm-hmm.
smaller percentage of people.
Mm.
The other part for me is a curiosity, which we've touched
Mm-hmm.
on a lot, of asking why, because then they're gonna improve. They're gonna learn from it,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully as well. If okay, if you tell someone just to say why and they don't listen, but if they hear it enough, they're really going to dig into it. So many
Mm.
people are happy, if they're in a client driven world when they get a job on. And so they don't
Mm.
ask, okay, well, why is that last person left? And was it progression? Okay, if it was, why is there not progression there? How long do you see this
Mm.
person in the role for? And it leads you into a whole path of questioning that will open up, a lot about that client's logic as well. So curiosity is the second. The third for me is that sort of mental agility. I've hired some really bright people, some really thick people over the years. The success has normally been down to how quickly and agile they are in their thoughts, because you're on the phone a lot of the time speaking to clients, you're on a Teams call. If you're not able to drive the conversation and think on your feet, you're going to be
Yeah.
sat there going and cut a
Yeah.
conversation off a lot earlier and actually trip yourself up. And I think too often we So I've seen some recruitment companies will, and Michael Page started off doing this, only hire graduates. We only want the grads because the non-grads, they're not sharp enough. And I'm a non-grad. So I
Same.
was always going to my director, I want these non-grads, I want these people. And I fought for Alan Collymore because he was a non-grad, bit of a wild card, hadn't done recruitment. And I was like, no, I want that sort of person who's got the work ethic, resilience to him, and I'll train him because he'll be like me. However, the training was all structured that didn't suit him. I suited him, but the training and company didn't. And I realized that very quickly. And we shifted it over the years, but I'd always go to my boss and go, come on, I want to hire these people. And she's like, okay, Joe, you can try it a little bit, but it hasn't worked historically. And you're just a one-off. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, that's not the thing. It's because I'm curious. And yes, I'm the hardest working person. I'm always the first one here, last one to leave.
Yeah.
I'm switched on throughout the whole day, and I always have been without any coffee, which people think is strange because I guess every
that is quite strange.
A lot of caffeine. But yeah, that mental agility part, you don't have to be the brightest person. You can be the most socially aware person, and therefore great with communication and able to play a room and these sort of things. So that mental agility is hard to measure, but you can normally see it in an interview if you throw a curveball in. And that's the whole reason, like Google and all these places throwing these really wacky questions. It doesn't really matter the response. It's actually what your thought process is and how you think about it. And I've seen so many people sit there and struggle through a conversation that you're then going, these are clients who are normally on, a lot more money than you're on in recruitment, especially your base salary. When you come in new, you might be a graduate on 25,000. You're speaking to clients who are probably on 100K plus. I need to know that you can keep up with that conversation without being at the same intellect or the same level of technical knowledge, that you're able to go, okay, why is that? And learn from their answers to ask the next question. And I think too often we put that down to academics and intelligence, but it's not just that. It's a social intelligence that comes with it as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I started off as an apprentice, and as I said, we didn't really have any sort of formal training, and I fluffed my GCSEs, got held back a year. And when I left my first job after like a few months, I really wanted to continue the apprenticeship so that I could just say to my mum, look, I've actually followed something through. I didn't even care. But I remember interviewing in the city the first ever time. I can't remember the name of the company. They also did social care recruitment, big corporate business. And I remember him just straight away. He sat down. He was really like scruffy looking as a director. I found it really, really strange. But he said to me, why should we hire you? We only hire grads. And I immediately off the cusp was just like, I've got emotional intelligence. I'm really good on my feet. I've been through a lot of shit growing up as a teenager. So a client just hanging up on me is absolutely nothing. And I've grown up around, entrepreneurs, and I'll work harder than anyone. And he said, okay, well, if you work here, you're not allowed to do your apprenticeship. And I was just like, what? And when he said that, I was just like, that's so strange. Like the tutor's literally just going to come into the office, sit by my side for an hour a week. And he went, that's an hour a week that you can be on the phone. I was like, right, okay. And I didn't take that job. But after that, I think there was like 2 or 4 more interviews where I had, and they were like, yeah, you're great. And then they told the recruiter it's a no, purely because I didn't have a degree. And that kind of like spurred me on, that like FU mentality. Like, I'm going to prove you all wrong. Everyone that interviewed me, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I think that kind of mindset and that trait in a recruiter is someone like, who are you trying to prove wrong? Who are you trying to prove that you're going to be successful? And normally it's a lot of people, it's a parent, it's like a mum or a dad that, maybe didn't show them enough love or said that you're a bit of a failure, so you prove them wrong. For me, it was past employers that would treat me like shit. And I always used to say, like, you're going to look on LinkedIn one day and see how successful I am, and I'm going to show you. And that was the sort of drive that I had. But where you said about the mental agility, it's a really interesting point, actually. And I've not really necessarily heard it said that way. But I think it's so important to have as a recruiter. I mean, me doing this podcast, we've got on my other screen 3 of the topics, which is like my guide, but I don't do preparing questions and stuff. And maybe this is my weird, wacky way of doing things, but it's almost like I'm training my mind to be like quick-witted and think of things on the spot. Because when I'm working with a recruiter, if I'm not sharp, I lose credibility immediately. If they sit there and say, well, what would you ask, Charles? Or how would you close that? If I can't go, well, do you know what? Bang. They're going to be like, this guy's fucking shit. So I've constantly got to be on it. The last thing I'll say on that before we move on to the final bit, Joe, for a recruiter that listens to that, or a founder that listens to that and go, I've got a couple of recruiters that maybe aren't as sharp and able to turn it around. Have you got any like tips or advice for someone that can get better at that aspect?
Part of that is giving that person structure. If you don't have the mental agility, it's going to mean you're probably going to lack that commercial acumen to connect the dots. So you need to probably mirror a top performer who can connect
Yeah.
those for you. And that might be going back to resourcing or
Mm.
working with a top performer who's able to break things down or watch them.
Yeah.
Because it does hold people back a lot of the time, especially if they don't have the confidence yet to build the relationships with clients that
Yeah.
actually going to generate them the revenue anyway. Because when people are starting out without that, they're very dependent upon who they're reporting into. And as we know,
Mm.
you could be reporting into a great recruiter, but a shit manager
Yeah.
who's not going to give you the support you need, give you the time, the kind of methods behind it. So if you've got those people, I think it is changing the support. You can't just
Mm.
expect them with time to get better. You're going to need to sit down and give them a route or share with them. Okay, great. This is how I would work. This is how I might
Yeah.
do
Yeah. Yeah.
it. What do you think about that? Now, if they can't come up with a way, you want to get them so they're telling you their concern. Oh, I worry about doing it that way, Joe. I might piss
Mm.
people off.
Mm.
Or, oh, I wouldn't know how to do that. Great. Let me coach you how to do that and
Yeah.
get you
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
that point. But I think there's normally something where, for me, I've always been that person to connect the dots and try and work
Yeah.
smarter. I don't want to have to do 1,000 calls a day. I'd rather call 10 people. But when I call those people, I'm able to say of previous relationships,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
connections, why I think I can actually fill it and my, routes to it. Um, and if someone can't think like that, I think I'll walk them through the methodology a lot of,
Yeah.
okay, great. Well, I'll go on, look at where they've worked before, look at who's worked there with them that I might know and connect
Yeah.
that. If
Yeah.
someone doesn't have that, then they're going to have to generate it normally through the numbers game.
Yeah.
So it's probably just adapting your training and realizing that person might not be a top performer in the future, but they can
Mm.
still be very profitable and earn a really good living from recruitment. But they're going to have to adapt their way of working. They're probably not going to be able to copy the person billing £1 million a year. If they
Yeah.
don't have that mental agility, they're not going to get to that level. They'll probably get to the
Yeah.
200, 250 maybe, which is fine. You can't
Mm.
have everyone billing £1 million in a big business anyway. You
Mm.
need those people with stability there filling that gap. So
Yeah.
I think every owner will always want everyone absolutely smashing it, which is
Mm.
great. But in reality, different personalities, these sort of things, you're going to have people at different stages of that development.
Yeah, no, I what you said there earlier about the structure, that's kind of nailed it on the head for me. Where I've worked with consultants that perhaps are what we spoke about earlier, where they're rushing to get off the phone because they don't know what to say next, or a client throws a curveball and they're just a lot of ums and ums and whatnot. When I was the L&D manager, I said one of my first goals I wanted to set was to create a company training handbook. And the reason why is because we were quite short on seniors and managers. And we had aggressive hiring plans mainly for sort of rookies, grads and stuff. The time spent to integrate training is going to be quite limited from the managers, and because it's just one of me, I hired someone 5 months into that job to then reinforce the training and the coaching is to like 50 people is going to be really hard. So I just created like a structure for how you qualify candidates, and all it was rather than a script per se, it's like, what are the key bits of info you need to get out of qualifying a candidate, qualifying a job, qualifying a lead. And it was just bullet points with like some questions that I'd ask underneath it. And then I would use that with a consultant, do it in training, do it in the one-to-one coaching, and then say, right, Joe, what is your plan for the next hour? Are you going to qualify candidates for this role in London? Okay, cool. Go to page 9. That's the candidate qualification. Obviously, you do your intro and your close in that order, but everything else in between, besides the leads and the references, which comes at the end, if it means that you start off with salary, because that's what's most important to them, then you go to location or whatever. Don't care which way, do it your way, but just make sure you tick every single box off and get the information. And if you think you've got enough info on their salary, look at the open questions underneath it. What's their salary? Cool. How did they get to there? Where do they want to go? Why is that their desired salary, etc.? Ask those questions, and that allowed consultants to build that habit. And because you're then building up this commercial acumen of, oh, right, okay, well, actually, that candidate didn't get the job because I didn't get enough flexibility on their salary. They start to get more commercially astute. And then next thing you know, they've got the book open. I remember seeing senior consultants with the book open, but they're kind of looking off into the looking out of the window to the city and stuff, and then occasionally look back at their book and go, all right, let me see. Is there anything else? Oh, I didn't actually ask. Tell me about your other processes right now. Where else are you interviewing? And it was just that little reminder, which was just power for consultants. So yeah, I think those handbooks sometimes, if they're comprehensive and not too wordy and whatnot, I wish I had them personally. I thought they were great.
Yeah, definitely. I remember I had one that was a laminated sheet and it was from my MD who hadn't done recruitment for a while, but everyone used to say she was the top biller and she was an amazing recruiter.
Mm,
And a lot of directors were good billers, but they had the leadership skills, so they
yeah.
progressed up. She was obviously a top biller. She had a laminated sheet that I used to give to every new starter, and it was full of bullet points,
Hmm.
all really good questions. Why? What are you doing here? And
Hmm.
really digging into questions. But it was probably too much in one sheet, like you say, that people were
Yeah.
kind of a bit lost by it. But for me, I studied it and memorized all those
Yeah.
questions because I knew also it was coming from someone who had billed, had done it. And it didn't matter. It was probably 10 years before I was billing that she'd
Mm,
created this, but it was still true. It was still those why questions,
yeah.
you know, the open questions that are going to drive more engagement from the client and get the client
Mm,
thinking. Too often as recruiters, we don't challenge the client. We don't get them to
mm,
think. We just ask what they want and
yeah.
what are you looking for? And then it's roll the dice whether you fill it or not. And that's a
Yeah.
horrible position to be in. And that's what gets people disengaged with agency
Yeah.
recruitment a lot of the time.
Yeah, I always talk through linear questioning and finding the why behind the why. I've got like four magic questions that I teach people. What else? Why is that? Why else? Who else? If you can just use those questions in every single call, you'll just get so much more info. And I always explain to people, because my first ever work experience was working in a gym and they had a swimming pool. And the guy freaked me out by saying like the first like millimeter of water is like just human waste, basically. I was like, gross. And I always say to consultants, like when you're on the phone, you ask the what you're looking for and they say I'm looking for 100k salary. Cool, next question. You've got that surface layer, you haven't got deep enough. And I know there's like those memes of the people digging away and then they give up and then the diamonds are just right there. You haven't actually got the actual info. And I lost out on deals before where I've asked what's important and they say like most of the candidates in my market were it was progression for them, they wanted to progress. And I go, yeah, right. Oh, Joe, my candidate's looking for progression. What jobs why is he looking for progression? Didn't ask. So then the next time you go and ask the candidate, why are you looking for progression? Well, I don't know. It's just because I just want my CV to look like I've progressed. Do you know what the next role will entail as a regional manager? You know, how much travel, you've got a young family. I haven't actually, no. So what about a role that offers progression in terms of personal development and money? Is that still interesting to you? Yeah, actually, that is. Okay, so no, so it's not the management thing. That's just my own internal sort of judgment of what they've just said there. Actually, you just need to dig one step further. But yeah, I think the big takeaway from this for recruiters listening, and there's loads of takeaways, just master the open questions and just dig. That like if you can just do that and then work on your commercial acuity and the rapport building skills and all the rest of it, if you can just master those open questions, I think you'll be relatively all right in this industry, right?
Yeah, definitely. It crosses disciplines. You can recruit. I've always changed the industry I've been in and these sort of
Mm,
things in the same company, and I was criticised a lot for it early on. But the goal was always actually I'll give that a go. So when I hire someone to do that desk, it's warm.
mm,
There's track
yeah.
record there, and it means if you're asking those questions, you could do any market. There's no blocks for you, of you don't need to be
Yeah.
the technical specialist. I've seen qualified accountants doing finance recruitment and fail at it. So it's not a technical level you need.
Yeah.
It's as recruiters, we need to be good at understanding why and the questioning rather than being a market specialist all the time. The market specialist
Mm.
what can elevate you in the future. But when you're starting out, it's just literally understand the person you're dealing with, like in any sales role, definitely.
Yeah, spot on. Well, as you know, Joe, every episode I finish off with the same question. Following this particular episode today, how can viewers and listeners get 1% better in recruitment?
For us, it's a lot of what we've talked about. It's that curiosity, but also take a step back and actually think about what you're doing, the successes you've had, why have they been? How did you win that business? How did you fill that role? And everyone always talks about the wild card person they placed, but normally they've prepped the client to be open
Yeah.
to a wild card, or they got the relationship. So I think for more people, they need to actually analyze how they work and think, where are the holes? What do I need to get better at? Who can I speak to about it? Because yes, if you're billing 500,000, there's someone billing 1 million, and you can
Yeah.
see what they're doing as well. Well, that might be investing in someone like yourself, L&D training perspective as well. But I think too often we shut ourselves off when we're happy with our level of performance amongst our peers. It can be
Mm.
quite dangerous, because it means if you go into a company and you're the top performer, you're happy with yourself. You're not trying to get better. But you've got to realize you go to another recruitment company who are stronger, they're performing better, higher average fees, these sort of things, you're going to very quickly get that jog. So there's always someone better out there than you. If you're asking why, you're going to learn more. But when you're going from, already at a good level of billing to get to a top level, normally comes down to your client relationships. And your relationships are always that much stronger when you're challenging them and asking why. Because those recruiters that call up, pitch out of nowhere, I've got amazing candidate, I've got
Mm.
Superman, I'm going to fill the job, I'm amazing, and I'm really cheap. Clients are a little bit more savvy to that now and
Yeah.
say no, but clients want someone who's going to give that actual advice and consultation,
Mm.
especially when you're at a decent level of recruitment as well.
100%. What an awesome answer, Joe. Really, really appreciate your time. I think we've gone through so much value there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to clipping this up and getting this out on the socials, to be fair, mate. So yeah, in terms of how people can reach out to you if they do, I imagine your business will potentially be growing and stuff like that. What's the sort of best way for people to reach out if they've got questions for you or just want to speak to you?
Yeah, certainly. So LinkedIn, we're a LinkedIn partner. So for us, everything runs through LinkedIn
Mm.
on that side. So drop me through a message, connection request. We are hiring at Insight as well, and offering
Nice.
a lot of the training that we've considered and thought about. So if you're looking to get into recruitment, or an experienced recruiter looking for a change at the moment, then feel free to reach out. As you say, I'll always be honest and let you know whether Insight's for you or not.
Mm.
Because for some people, I've turned away probably very good recruiters who might not fit here. But for us, it's
Yeah.
about the long term and those sort of relationships as well. So, yeah, definitely feel free to connect on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Nice one. Lovely. Well, for everyone that's got this far, like, subscribe, all that type of jazz. It helps the podcast. And yeah, that's it. Thanks very much for listening, watching, and until next time. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed it, like, subscribe, follow, drop a comment on either platform, and message me on LinkedIn what your biggest takeaway of today's episode is. If you also feel like somebody else could take some value from this, repost it, share it, tag someone in. If you think you or someone else could be a fantastic guest as well, put them in touch with me or get in touch with me yourself. We're always looking for new guests, and yeah, we only really have legends on this, as you can probably tell already. So as I mentioned, like, subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. It genuinely helps so much, and I've got massive plans for this podcast, and we're loving doing it every step of the way. Keep getting 1% better, everybody. Let me know what your biggest takeaway from today's episode is, and I'll see you next week.